Hey guys, Johnny Crims 2000 here for a new episode of Hidden Gaming Gems. Today I will be looking at a game that may have been overlooked for plenty of reasons, though few may have to do with the actual game itself. Emerging from the shadows is Batman Begins from Arkham, published by EA Games and released for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Hot on the heels of the first film in Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, Batman Begins the video game was released a few days before the movie. As with most big-budget summer blockbusters, Batman Begins is a tie-in to the movie and takes many elements from its source material while still having the freedom to create a unique experience from both a gameplay and a storytelling perspective. The plot of the game, as you could imagine, is pretty much the same as the film. Bruce Wayne's transformation from a multimillionaire playboy into the Dark Knight on his quest to prevent Gotham City's destruction. The game even goes the extra step by showing clips as a way to tie in some key elements from the film. So you can sort of consider this game to be a simplified version of the movie. It shows enough clips from the movie to give you an idea of what it's about, without actually having to show absolutely everything. While this would seem rather redundant if you've already seen the film, the game does go deeper and tries to provide more insight into some scenes and even showcases extra parts of the story that weren't seen in the movie, like Bruce Wayne's training. What this amounts to is a game that shows the player a somewhat condensed version of what is shown in the actual film, while still providing more detail through gameplay about events that didn't make it onto the big screen. So you can consider this game a supplemental offering meant to be experienced along with the film in order to get the whole picture of what's going on. Overall, I found that this method worked, and even if you didn't see the film, you still knew what was going on. And even without having known that this was based off of an actual film, the cutscenes and in-game dialogue do a well enough job that you still get a full storyline that is fairly easy to follow. From a gameplay standpoint, I'd be lying if I said that this game was anywhere near the caliber of the Arkham games, which came out much later. However, this game does provide a very satisfying and unique system that I feel really captures what Batman is all about. While most Batman games end up being very action-oriented, with the game mechanics usually dealing with combat and the use of gadgets, Batman Begins goes the complete opposite route by instead focusing on stealth and a very unique system of fear. This is Batman after all, and the entire reason why he created the persona of Batman was to strike fear onto evildoers everywhere. And seeing as how this game tells of Batman's first adventures, most of the enemies in this game still only think of him as an urban legend. So you have to use that to your advantage, striking fear onto enemies in order to get the upper hand and advance through the game. For starters, Batman's gadgets act a little differently this time around. You don't have as many gadgets as some of the other Batman games, but you really don't need them all. You have your grappling hook, flash grenades, smoke grenades, your trusty batarang, and a few others. Almost all of these gadgets are situational, and you will only really get good use out of them if the game commands it. Some may think that this would be a letdown, but again, you don't really need them in a system that's focus isn't on the combat. Kind of like how Solid Snake doesn't really need to have a whole arsenal of weapons because that's really not what he's about. The game is essentially broken up into three sections. You have your combat mode, stealth mode, and you have a couple of missions using the Tumblr. Most of the game, especially early on, you will be in stealth mode, which essentially means that you're going to be sneaking around and solving some puzzle elements, all the while trying to advance through the mission. One of the great things about this game is that it doesn't try to hide the fact that Batman is human. In this game, Batman can't take too much damage before he goes down, and he definitely can't take too many bullets before you get a game over. Batman can only take about 2 to 3 single bullets, so how do you combat this? You strike fear, of course. Throughout the game, you'll be put into situations where you're in a room with thugs holding weapons, and the only way to get rid of those weapons is to frighten your enemies enough so that they drop their guns while they cower in fear. You're able to strike fear onto your enemies a number of different ways, most involving your environment. For example, you can have an entire room filled with armed thugs conversing underneath a chandelier. As you sneak around above them, you can use your batarang to cut the rope to have the chandelier crashing to the floor, causing your enemies' hearts to race, opening them up for attack. The system is made easier by the presence of a fear gauge that shows you the amount of fear that you're currently striking onto enemies. The same tactic repeats itself throughout the game, but the manner in which you handle it becomes trickier each time, sometimes requiring you to separate a group to make things easier, dealing with cameras, or dealing with other manners of getting detected. The combat itself is admittedly the weakest part of the game, though that's not much of a deal breaker since you're mostly going to be sneaking around for most of the game. Batman can strike up some nice combos which can flow very nicely between multiple enemies at once. This is also the portion of the game where you can make use of your smoke and stun grenades, both essentially being used to stun enemies in case you want to get the upper hand, or in case you want a nice little break from the action. This is also the part of the game where you're able to use intimidation tactics to interrogate fallen enemies. If you can raise the fear level high enough before you engage a group of enemies in combat, the last enemy will be so stricken with fear that you can use the fear to your advantage. You can hoist the thug high in the air and begin interrogating him for information that will be used to progress through the game. It doesn't necessarily add that much to the gameplay, but it's still a nice attention to detail for the character himself and gives you a valid reason for why you have to use fear in the first place. The Tumblr sections are few and far between, which can either be a good thing or a bad thing depending on your taste. Personally, I feel that there's just enough of them to satisfy my crave for driving segments, but not enough to get monotonous. These sections are where you can really let loose and get away from having to sneak around everywhere, as they simply amount to some arcade-style racing stages. The Tumblr is easy enough to control, and you have access to weapons, a jump, and a nitrous boost to make things interesting. These sections usually amount to little more than getting from point A to point B, though at certain sections you will be asked to take out a couple of the enemies on the road as well. While this game could have benefited from having a bit more variety with the Tumblr, what's there is good enough. Presentation-wise, Batman never looked as dark as he does in this game. Taking cues from the film, Batman Begins really crafts near movie-like set pieces that really bring the world of Gotham City to life. The characters and environments are appropriately dark and mysterious, making great use of lighting, which is crucial for when you're trying to sneak around to get the upper hand on your enemy. The settings are also great, ranging from dimly lit hallways to outdoor segments where you can really get the size and scope of the city. The view of Gotham as the skyscrapers stand tall amongst the moon is really a beautiful sight to see, and this game does a wonderful job at making the environment an integral part of the game, which makes sense in a game where you end up using the environment to your advantage. While the animation is a little wonky sometimes, especially during the combat, the graphics really get the job done and look absolutely gorgeous, especially for a game released around this time. I have no problem in saying that you could pause this game at any time and it would look almost like it was a screenshot from the film. The sound for this game also gets a nod for being faithful to the film adaptation, which was already amazing to begin with. While most of the music is atmospheric, it gets the job done well by setting the right mood for sneaking around and trying to strike fear. It doesn't need to be over the top, but can still pick up when it needs to. Some of the major actors from the film also return to lend their voices, which really adds authenticity to the game by serving as another connection to the film. The great thing about it as well is that the lines spoken in this game didn't sound phoned in, and it made it seem like the actors got invested in this game just as they had been for the film, which is something that can easily make or break any game's presentation. And finally, having the ability to unlock different Batman costumes really makes for a game that is not only faithful to the film, but also one that longtime fans could appreciate for nostalgia's sake. Getting the chance to play through the game as the world's greatest detective Batman really makes playing worthwhile. So now you may be wondering, why do I consider this game to be a hidden gaming gem? This game was based on the critically acclaimed film that spawned arguably the most successful superhero trilogy of all time, and you would be correct, but you have to look at how things were for Batman at the time when this game first came out. For starters, the last time the Batman had been featured in a film was the universally panned Batman and Robin, which single-handedly put Batman's film adaptations on hold for the better part of a decade, and made him look more like a joke than a brooding vigilante. So even though audiences had reason to applaud this newer, more adult version of Batman, there was still some reserve for people who had endured the last time they went to see the Caped Crusader on the big screen. On the video game front, things weren't all roses and butterflies either. For starters, this was a movie adaptation after all, which have historically been poorly made and rushed, resulting in games that depend on the license for a quick buck, as opposed to being driven by the gameplay itself. The fact that this was being developed by EA didn't help matters either. That's not to say that EA is a bad developer, but they were more famously known for their sports titles than their action and stealth games. Even if it were made by EA, Batman's previous titles hadn't done much to push the envelope for what a Batman game could be. Both Batman Vengeance and Batman Rise of Sin Tzu were mostly seen as average, while Batman Dark Tomorrow was universally panned and described as the worst Batman game of all time. So you can sort of see why people would be skeptical of playing a new Batman game. The mentality was that it was either going to be a kiddie game likened to the previous Batman and Robin movie, or it was just going to be, at best, an average game featuring Batman. Regardless, this is still a very well crafted game on its own, made better by the production values and the fact that it finally did something different with the Batman license. If you're a fan of either Batman or just good games in general, you owe it to yourself to at least give this one a try. As always, if you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel if you want to get more stuff from me. In the meantime, if you like my videos, be sure to find me on Twitter, Tumblr, Raptr, and Screwattack.com to see the other gaming related content that I upload. Info is in the description. Who knows? Maybe you'll like my stuff. Maybe.